Well, it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked, Tim. So here we are again, back on schedule. I apologize for taking vacation time. Actually, I don't. I don't.
Yeah, no apologies required. I'm glad you got some time off and got time to get grounded. Everybody needs that.
Absolutely. So what's topic today? Is it we're thinking of organizational change and how we as project managers are part of that organizational change process?
Yeah, we have two components of change that we want to consider. Number one, the fact that businesses change and they use projects to make change happen. Second of all, businesses change, and while projects are in flight, projects are impacted by that change. So I wanted to have that discussion. Um, and again, when we talk about change, we talk about a standard process for addressing it. But this is a lot of times, these are like changes in enterprise environmental factors where we don't have a lot of control. So I thought this would be a really interesting topic for us to discuss.
Well, good. And I thought what I might do is to think about in terms of even in my situation where after I hate to say this, but after 40 years of being on projects and managing projects, my experience has kind of covered the full gamut, I think, of what we might be talking about today. And that is, I have worked as a subcontractor to a contractor, which is then hired by an organization to put in a system. So if you think about that, I now have three masters, right? I want to be able to satisfy my objectives. I want to be loyal to the people that hired me in terms of the contract. But most importantly, I have to keep in mind that we're doing this system on behalf of the organization that has hired the full body of us to do their work. So, sometimes you end up in a situation where you're kind of treading a fine line between our objectives to perhaps make a profit versus the client's objectives to put forward a good product to their end users. So I think we're going to have a good discussion today.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. And that actually starts us off well. And again, projects, exist to manage change for the organizations. However, you brought up a good point. What do you mean by organization? And when you have an organization that you're doing the project for, like you said, are we talking about multiple layers or priorities or criticality of these stakeholders, or is there one primary that you always focus on, say, this is the change that I'm considering, and this is the client I'm supporting the end?
Boy, that's a tough one because as I mentioned, kind of in my opening gambit, is that we do tread a fine line. If I support the organization that has hired us to do the project, and that's at odds with my organization that I'm working for, I could stand the chance of being let go. And so a lot of people, when they end up in that situation, where are they going to go? It's self-preservation. But you asked me directly, and I am of the opinion, and actually the last several years of the experience, that I always will try to influence the project in such a way that I am ultimately benefiting the organization that hired us to put in their new system.
Boy, oh boy, I feel that. Treading that fine line. I was in a system integration position where I was actually working as an expert, as a business and financial analyst to a system integrator. And they wanted to demonstrate that, the value of the project was based on their product. And I had to be very careful because actually, the value that the client was getting was not necessarily on the product and the product's result, but it was the decisions and the type of the decisions client was making to place that product inside their operations. This was a software solution, and it wasn't such that the product was different from all the other competitors. It was that the client was actually making the right decisions to use the product in its proper manner, where a lot of people had not in the last 2 or 3 years. And it was fascinating to see this client very happy. And so the system integrator was pleased as punch too. I'm going, yeah, as long as everybody's happy, I'm okay, but we're not
Yeah.
really happy for the same reason.
Well, and let me share a little vignette that I experienced. It's probably mid-career, and we were working for a government department. We had a large, I think it was task-based, task order contract. We had, I think, 4 or 5 tasks that we had to complete. One of which dealt with, well, I'm trying to think if this was the Y2K or somewhere around that around that era, and we had bid based on what we knew and what had been provided to us. Well, I got my team in there. We started looking at this task, and we realized that the organization we were working for actually had things well in hand, in that we were way overbid. I mean, the bottom line was going to be incredibly benefited by what we were not going to have to do, but yet be able to bill on a fixed price contract. And so as I was thinking about this, I kept thinking, my vice president just talked about the fact that we have to be fair to our clients. So I went to him and I said, we bid we're over $1 million above our normal project margin for this task. I think we should give that money back to the organization. I kind of put him in a situation where, you don't want to give up $1 million, but at the same time, you can't preach to your whole staff saying we have to be fair to our clients and be good citizens. So, and here's the rest of that story. By the way, I was not fired. I maintained my job. But the rest of the story was, we had a steering committee meeting and I presented this news to the department head. I thought he was going to fall out of his chair. He basically looked at me and said, "No contractor I have ever hired has ever come back to me and given me back money." And we made a lot of points for our organization at that point. And so I think, it's one of those things where, who do we benefit? Who do we favor, perhaps? And in my case, I ended up opting to favor the client that we were working for.
Yeah. And as a rule of thumb, you can't go wrong with that. You have to consider all the needs. You're doing a stakeholder assessment. You're not just favoring the person with the highest rank in the room, but at the same time, that's not bad guidance.
Well, and the goodwill sometimes that you earn as a result of an action like that can be far more beneficial than the amount that was saved. So yeah, I think I made the right decision. It proved to be the right decision. I moved on to do something else after that, but yeah, it was an interesting experience.
And that's in a consulting model. But what if you're an internal project manager and you're working with just IT? Do you think we still have those considerations where we have a lot of horses pulling the cart, and sometimes we just have to consider that the horses are pulling the cart for different reasons, and we have to be careful with all of their needs and their interests?
I'm going to ask you that question back at you, but from my perspective, what I have noticed, as I have advised IT organizations within a corporate structure, that they ultimately are there to serve their corporation, and to serve it through maintaining good systems, serve it through building brand new systems that are beneficial to their customer base as well as their customers' customer base. And so therefore, it is incumbent upon them not only to take instructions from their client, because their customer, the business side of the house is their client, but also it's incumbent on them to be very, very transparent in advising them on the best way to go. So perhaps it's even more incumbent on internal IT organizations to support their client base.
Yeah, and as as a member of IT, I found it a lot easier internally to not just utilize, your power through your rank and your title, but also through your understanding and knowledge of the business politically and culturally, and be able to use that not to manipulate the decision, but to actually help people make the right decisions for their organizations, as well as get the product or the change that they need, and that's what I found. You always have that corporate voice inside of a single business that actually is that North Star that makes things a little more common sense than if you're out in the wild world working under contract.
I 150% agree with you. And the reason I say that, and here's what I've noticed also when I've advised IT organizations, some people are in there just to satisfy their IT, their smarts. Let me put it that way. They love IT, and so they want to do everything. And they forget that part of what they do as being IT experts, they also need to become experts in the business.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I don't want business to become an IT expert, but I do want the IT people to become business experts, because if they understand business as well as business does, then they are much more likely to provide sound advice.
Yeah, indeed. And again, we're going back to the talent triangle and the wisdom PMI had back in 2015, saying this is the direction project managers have to go. The engineering part is fun, but it's fun to the point where it actually serves a purpose.
Yeah, and how many times have you come across IT staff who do it for the IT? Wow, if I'm part of this organization, I get to play with the latest and greatest technology. That's fine, but does that latest and greatest support your end user? And that's the main part that we're trying to get across.
And exactly right. We have our favorite cookie recipe, or we have our favorite pizza, right? And sometimes the problem has to be a different flavor of pizza or a different type of cookie. And that's where, as a project manager, the remain objective stays there. But a lot of times I even get in trouble because I realize I'm doing something I really enjoy. The projects I do right now, they're all like, they're my children, but I have to be ready in a moment's notice. If the organization decides it's no longer valuable, it's not that it's not valuable to me. It's not valuable to the objectives of the organization. And first of all, I can't take it personally. Second of all, I have to understand, that there are things that happen, that organizations have to make these decisions, and I'm going to agree with it. That's the rule of consensus.
And so the first, I think, if we can kind of wrap this part up, I think what you had said, something along the lines of projects exist to manage change for the organization. That's true. And then from our perspective as project managers, whether we're consultants, i.e. outside people, or internal IT people, which is the organization that we serve? And I think through this discussion, I have come to the definite conclusion that the ultimate organization we serve is the business organization that is employing us.
Yes, exactly right. And whether it's a nested employment or whether it's a direct employment through direct payment, we're looking at the voice of that customer. We used to call them the final end user or the final customer. That used to be the formal term. I don't hear that so much right now.
No, and it is a little different because when I do a project for an organization, it's to make their job easier to deal with their clients. And often we're creating portals for their clients to do self-service. And so that better be good. So yeah, I understand what you're saying there. So a lot of times our end user really isn't the client within the company, it's the client they're serving that's outside in the public.
And this is something we have to get straight. Now, any layer of these relationships can actually drive change. And that's where things get goofy. So when we're looking at a change, we're looking at, number one, does it help project success? Number two, does it have any value, right? Value is it's necessary to make this project successful, or it's necessary to minimize the problem. A problem that we have with this project, right? How do you determine whether this change has value or whether this change is necessary? And in your position, is this a change that actually need to influence and have other people decide? That's a hard question.
It is, and I've been on both sides of the coin, if you want to use sort of that example. When I was pure project managing on behalf of a system integrator, a lot of that work in terms of determining value was done ahead of time and was therefore put into a request for a proposal. And so then I would compete, my company would compete against several other companies to win the business. But the assumption in those situations was that the client had done their homework and therefore would not have been putting out the request for proposal had there not been expected value for doing the project. So that's the one side as a pure contractor into a business. On the other hand, I have been hired by several large organizations to help them do the cost benefit analysis or the return on investment analysis. And that's a whole different game. So if there are consultant project managers listening to us today, believe me, the job of the client in terms of determining return on investment or cost benefit is much harder just to get that value created so that they can then let the project out.
Yeah, and again, like you, I've found myself not just as a consultant, but even as just a basic project manager, I've found myself in that advisory role, that role of influence. I do the math. I understand the problem. I know what I would do if I was a CEO or the CIO, but it's ultimately their decision. So I see my role as not so much an agent of that change, but a facilitator or an advisor that change. So I'm more in a role of influence, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. If it was my money, I'd be the decision maker, but it's not my money, and I've always respected that.
Well, and what's interesting is when I've done these the cost benefit analysis and the feasibility studies for an organization before they let the project to the public for bidding, I often provide up to 3 alternatives.
Oh yeah.
So then you end up with a situation that is even more difficult to complete. Some of them take a year just to be able to do the analysis and get all of the determining factors to come up with the cost benefit. And so then the client, the ultimate decision maker, as you call them, has an option to say, okay, of these 3, what makes best sense for my organization? And what questions should I ask of this person to help me make that decision? So yeah, in that case, again, I may be the legwork, but I'm also the influencer in terms of the way I present the idea.
This is very interesting. I myself also have been brought onto many projects as a financial and business analyst, and I've been basically an assistant to the decision maker.
Yeah.
And like you, what were the size of the projects where you were doing this type of analysis? How big were these projects?
One was just a little north of 100 million, and one was just a little south of 200 million that I can remember the most recent. And then they're sizable. They're very sizable.
And again, we when I was working 10 to 40 million dollar projects, should we do a data center? Yes or no? That's a nested problem. And they're looking at, how do I approach, this problem of acquiring and centralizing and standardizing and stabilizing corporate data, that's going to be a 1.5 to 3 year project. And that's going to be 7 months to put together a plan. So you are going to be sequestered with the decision makers for 2 months.
Yeah.
And, day in and day out, you're going to say, are we asking the right questions? Are these questions relevant for the problem? And do we really understand the problem? And what do we call as a successful decision in this size of a problem? It's not just answering a question or solving a problem. It's actually, how are we getting our hands around this so that we know we have the whole problem and we will solve it? So these things do take a lot of time.
Well, they do, and think about what you're just mentioning too. You're kind of tied at the hip with the decision maker, but you're not just satisfying the decision maker. In the examples that I gave, the $100 to $200 million projects, that department head may have had 6 or 7 divisions, each of which had priorities that needed to be satisfied by the system, some of which were competing. So you not only have to satisfy the decision maker isn't going to necessarily lay out all of the requirements that each of his or her division heads have. So it can become a very long, arduous, nested problem.
Yes. And you have to be patient.
You do.
That's one thing I learned. The executives I worked with commonly would have been in their role, not necessarily their position, but their role for 3 or 4 decades. And
Yeah.
these people, having to have made these decisions, were calm. They may not be relaxed, but they were calm, and they were very deliberate in the way they were doing. And I, being only 30 or 40 years myself, I was here jumping around saying, what about this, what about this? And they say, shh, don't worry, we'll get there, don't worry. Yeah. Let's go ahead and switch gears. Let's talk about the organization all of a sudden figures out they have a major change they have to respond to. And how are we going to do that? What's your role as a project manager or an advisor to a project? And how do you go about doing this change?
So you're talking about, we're in the middle of a project and there's a change that occurs. Yeah. Well, let me first of all start with a, a little story, a true story. People who are familiar with the American government will understand this. We were doing a very large project for one of the states, and right in the middle of the project, Congress passed something that we affectionately know as Obamacare, which was the Affordable Care Act. Well, what happened was the state that we were working for was doing a Medicaid system. The Affordable Care Act was still Medicaid oriented, but it had a whole bunch of new rules initiated. And so we were in the middle of a project. Our requirements were done, our design was partly done, and we suddenly had to stop, turn on our heels, understand the legislation, and then interpret that. So it happens and it's necessary. And so what do? We go back to our fundamentals. We already had governance in place, change request process in place, decision making in place, and we just resorted to those. It was a large change, obviously, but because we had all of those good project management concepts in place, it was actually relatively simple.
Yeah, I had a bit of a similar experience about 1998 when I was still an IT director at a state agency, and the governor's office called and wanted to talk to me and said, okay, we have this federal mandate and we need to respond to it. We need you to tell us within a day, and we'd like it before the end of the day if you can. How are you going to actually track your personal data of all the people you're managing through your system and not use their social security numbers as
Oh,
a
yes.
primary key, and do it in such a way that their privacy is protected. Boy, that's and again, what do you do? I went out, got a cup of coffee, and went for a 20-minute walk, and I said, how am I going to do this? And that's when I said, assess, dispense, and then plan.
Well, in a situation like that, it's even more critical probably because the SSN may have been a key to many files.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
the primary key. It was the most common sense primary key to
Yeah.
use.
Yeah.
But again, we're looking at, we're looking at 4 to 5 million people, 10 to 90 million records.
Yeah.
And how are we going to actually convert database? And just that problem alone took us a weekend to solve. But we had to figure out, okay, what's the response that the state really needs from us? And what is the change that the federal government is really requiring? So we had to do our sleuthing and figure out what the federal government was really asking for at that time, so that the state could give them what they knew exactly what they were doing. So I wasn't working, at odds with the state leaders who were mandating this, but I was working in such a way that I was proactively getting ahead of them so that the information and the advice and the decision I was making at my level not only helped them, but was exactly what they needed for the federal government.
Well, and I think you would ask, is our job just to validate the change or to support the change or to advise on the change? In my case, in my experience, I think it's all three. But, if we're to be true, solid project managers, project management consultants, it is up to us to absolutely look after the whatever the client is that wants to benefit from this particular system. And when we're doing that, it's up to us to be fully transparent. And that is, if suddenly I have to change my entire, let's say my entire training process and rewrite training guides, I have to put that into my estimate. If I have to redo all of my system testing, I have to put that in my estimate. But I have to be completely 100% detailed and transparent in letting my client know what the change is going to cost him, not just in time, not just in money, but also in time.
Yes.
And I've been in situations where we've done that advice and the client said, you know what? At this moment in time, it's not worth it. Let's reserve that for, let's say, post-implementation when we have some time to think about it. So there's, as long as you are the solid advisor with detail and truly advising your client with nothing in it for me, it's all for you, Mr. Client, then it works well.
Yeah, it takes time. It takes years to build up this type of knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle, but just the effort in staying ahead and staying relevant to what the project really is trying to do, whether or not you have direct access, is one of the most valuable things you can do.
Well, and I've been in situations where the client came and basically was almost table pounding a change. And we've had to go back and say, we'll do that change, but understand one of your sister agencies that is your trading partner is not equipped to be able to handle what you're asking us. So if we do that, we lose the ability to trade data with that partner because they don't often think of everything. They think of what's good for them, but they don't often think of what's good for kind of their entire environment.
Like you started off at the beginning of this show, it's not so much that we want to do stuff that's fun. It's that we like to focus on things we're strong in. and because we can give a better result and we feel more confident and experienced there. And the problem with that is, we can't be a master of all of these domains. I build, build basically a tribe of experts.
Yeah.
And over the years, so over 20 years, I generally have a Rolodex of people who say, hey, you do this on a regular basis. What do you think of this?
It's interesting. Let me simplify this also for me, for me. But just before you and I got on this podcast, I had met some colleagues for lunch. And we had a waiter that was very, very good. He walked us through the menu in such a way that we were able to make our choices. Now, what I've seen in IT situations, in some, and probably more internal organizations than with consulting organizations, is they become order takers, but not advisors. So rather than being the waiter that helps us through our choices, it's the waiter that stands there with the order book and just writes down what you tell him or her.
It's hard to have both sides of that spectrum. A
Yeah.
waiter that just says, tell me what you want, I don't care. And then a waiter that says, this is the best thing on the menu, and I'll tell you that. And
Yeah.
he's telling you that to every single table. And
Yeah.
it's like, who is the better waiter and who's the
Yeah.
better project manager?
Well, and that's when I say order takers, those IT professionals who basically listen to the client, and the client says, I need this, this, and this. And they say, yes, thank you, ma'am. That'll be 3 weeks. We'll have it for you, without looking at what does that really cost, or what does it really entail, or who does it really affect. So I think we as project managers have to be more than just order takers. We have to be true colleagues in arms, advisors, transparent, and all of the things that we've already been talking about.
So let's give this a hard turn, and let's hold no punches back. What happens when you're in the room with some people who are going in the direction you don't want to go? How do you go about telling them nicely, you guys are going in this direction. It's not my decision, but this is what's going to happen. If you don't turn the wheel within 45 seconds, the bus is going over the cliff.
Yeah.
How do you say that in a way that people can, number one, understand it in the middle of their joy, and number two, they can actually realistically consider it?
Well, I have a couple answers for that. My favorite, and I want to hear your response on this as well. My favorite is I never go into a meeting or write an email without having done my research first. And then when I get into that situation, and I have the situation you just described, where the client is about to take the entire project over the cliff, or someone else is, I just come very politely armed with the facts and ask questions. Have we, not did you, have we thought about this? So there's ways of presenting your research to counteract what's about to become a disaster.
Yeah. And always address this with questions and curiosity. People understand curiosity.
Yes.
People don't understand directives.
That's
the
true.
Socratic method is effective for a reason. You're disarming people when you're just asking questions.
Well, and here,
go ahead.
Finish your thought.
And second of all, I have this other magical tool called consensus, where I reserve to support my opinion and my work and still support the direction of the group. And that gets me on formal record, and that gives them an option to consider just before they turn the bus.
Yeah. What I was going to say, on top of that is, and there have been times that I've walked into a meeting fully researched, and some new, as a result of my questioning or the discussion, some new information comes to light. And then I personally can change my mind and support the new decision and the new direction. But again, it has to be an exchange of ideas and discussion so that we truly, as an organization, understand, I think you said consensus, understand in a full collaborative effort to go forward.
Yeah, there is no value in shutting people down yeah, and that includes shutting yourself down. There's no value in that. There this whole disagree and commit model, where I commit to the group yet I disagree to the direction, is a very powerful statement. It means that I value being part of this and I value what this means. And yet I have some information that I consider as very important. And it's a it number one, it's a powerful statement. You know, it's a statement of somebody with confidence if they've done their homework. And second of all, it actually respects that institution called the group that everybody else is fighting to protect. So it does influence that concept of, hey, Tim still believes in we.
Yeah, and then let me add to that is, even if you have trepidations or disagreement, but you come to that consensus, then you throw your full support behind that consensus.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no more. A month from now, I can't be sitting in the lunchroom grousing about the decision that I'm still supporting. We have to be fully supportive and lock arms. And I think one of my recent project management people that I'm working with right now said he uses the term stack hands. I kind of like that. We stack hands and we move forward. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's, again, this is a powerful statement. This whole, this whole transition of you versus me into a we has to be protected. Maybe not at all costs. I can't say it's an absolute, but at the same time, it has to be there in order for projects, especially, critical projects and projects that can't fail. If they are to actually succeed, you have to have that we. It's necessary.
And there are times, and 2 times in my career, 40 plus years, that I've actually walked away from that, where I presented my ideas, where I presented my concerns. They were discussed politely but not accepted, and therefore my decision in that case was not to support what I believed was not going to be a correct decision, but to actually leave that position. And in 2 cases, it cost me employment with that company. Not that I was fired, it's that I decided to leave at that point and find work elsewhere. But it's, if you feel like you're strong, your input is valuable, and if you really feel that it's going the wrong way, then you do have a decision to make. And I would rather see someone leave than to support something that might not work. By the way, one of those decisions where I did leave, it turned out that company on that project lost millions of dollars because exactly what I had predicted came true. Not that I want to come back and say I told you so, because I did not. But in fact, I could see what was about to happen and they weren't willing to listen. So I left that situation.
So what skills do you need to grow in order to actually become that type of an attitude, or that type of a person that's able to stand up and do that? What do you have to learn, and what do you have to acquire?
Well, I think the first thing, and I'll see if you agree with me, I think the first thing you have to learn and acquire is respect for that other side. You can disagree vehemently, but you need to do it with respect and understanding. And then I think the second thing is you also have to have confidence in your own abilities and say, I've made this decision. I either carry on with that decision supporting the organization, or I can take my skill set elsewhere. But so again, you have to have that inner confidence. So I think that's 2, understanding the human behavior and respecting it, but also having a skilled confidence in yourself.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the confidence comes from that understanding of human behavior, that EQ, that emotional intelligence. We have to learn how we function first before we can really understand other people. And learning how you function actually is like learning how to drive a car. The more you do it, the more confident you are. This is understanding of human behavior and understanding that certain people in certain positions are just going to drive buses off cliffs. And we just have to do that. We see this with a lot of business and industry leaders in the newspapers every 2 weeks right now, right? And you
Yeah.
say, well, that's who they are. You know, it's like a scorpion riding a crocodile across the river. You know, the scorpion says, give me a ride. And the crocodile says, you're going to sting me. And the scorpion says, I promise not. And halfway across the river, you know, the scorpion stings him because the scorpion is always going to scorpion. And understanding this from a human behavioral standpoint, people are people, and understanding what people really means. You know, this behavioral thing, both from an individual standpoint as well as a group and relationship standpoint. I cannot stress the value of investing time and effort in learning to be an expert in human behavior.
Well, and you and I have talked about this kind of on and off throughout all of our podcasts, or most of them. And I've always said, you know, when I first became a project manager, I thought, man, if I could just manipulate that schedule and come in on time, under budget, I'm the best there is. And in some cases, as I was young, I did it by stepping over bodies as well.
Yeah.
That is not project management. That is perhaps schedule management, but it doesn't take into account what, as you mentioned, the human behavior side. And there's a way of accomplishing the same thing and having respect for the individual, whether it's the person answering your phone or the person developing your database structure.
And that's the big difference between somebody who's been doing this job for 3 decades and who's been doing this job for 5 years. It's not necessarily the rules and tools, as you say. It's you know, how they treat people, how they treat themselves, and how they're able to understand, you know, that the perfect solution may not be the best solution.
Yeah.
And that we actually, you know, have multiple voices. And when a change occurs, this actually brings out the best and worst in everybody. And it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate, you know, this is a good way to do things. You don't have to follow my opinion, but at the same point, you know, please get my opinion on record, because there may come a time where it'll be valuable somewhere down the road.
And then also live up to your commitments, right? I mean, we've had situations, I've been on projects where we misbid something. And as a result of that, we were going to take a hit, a financial hit. But the idea is, if I want to survive in this business and get my recommendation for the next job, I have to establish that commitment. I have to be able to make sure, even if it's a financial cost to me, I have to be able to meet my commitment and help that client. So
it's a must. It's a must. And yes, we managers, you know, always make sure everybody does the right thing. But leadership is leadership is a role of sacrifice. It's you know, and the first thing that you sacrifice as a leader is ego. This is something that says, I may be right in my own mind, and that's fine. And I'll celebrate tonight, you know, the fact that I'm a smart person. But here I'm not Tim. I'm advisor. And what is advisor supposed to do?
yeah.
And that actually resets me. And I try to get that reset as often as I can.
And, you know, to have a good sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
You just mentioned leave the ego at the door kind of thing. And I remember I was in a meeting and I was probably the only person who was not in agreement with the consensus. And so I said, well, in my opinion, and I value it highly. Well, of course, I wouldn't have done that. It was my first meeting, but I knew these people as brothers and sisters by now. And so it got a big laugh. I still lost the argument, and I still supported the final decision, but at least they knew where I stood, and my sense of humor in that situation helped a whole lot.
Yeah, it actually represented you as someone who is not combative.
Yeah.
It represented you as somebody who was, having your own opinion, but actually working with open arms with these people. I've had people actually criticize my style, both my classes and my projects, where I'm a little too quote unquote casual, but at the same time, like 9 to 20 times the amount of those criticisms come off as saying, this is the most incredible experience I've had. I feel like this project is a defining point in my career. And so I'm still trying to struggle with this. Projects and doing the work of the business can be a work of ledgers and balance sheets and checklists, but at the same time, it can be a professional relationship where you can actually, not just get fulfillment, but really enjoy the process you're going through.
Yeah, I would do things in order to kind of get the group all kind of forming well. Whether they agreed with everything I did or not didn't really matter to me. And so at one point, back when we used to wear suits and ties, do you remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
So I would walk into a meeting. We got to the point where when I came into a meeting, I would either get thumbs up or thumbs down based on my shirt and tie combination.
Oh,
and it became a running ritual such that everyone was at ease when we began the project meetings. Now, did they agree with me at the end of the meeting? Not necessarily, but they liked my shirt and tie combination.
oh,
and they
that's
knew
great.
I was human. And that was the number one thing.
That's great. That's great. So this has been a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
This and again, we look at the whole idea that projects are change, and these change often are influential changes we have no control over. And there are some tools we can have, both from a behavioral as well as a functional way. We can actually facilitate the change. And I like the light that you and I discussed from an advisor standpoint and the project manager as advisor. I feel, and I've felt that for a couple decades, that this is really what makes me comfortable as a project manager. Not that I'm trying to, skirt authority, or I'm not trying to, skirt commitment. It just feels like that's the right thing to do, because these things are not my decisions.
Right. Well, and think of it this way, and this is how it can kind of help me with this as well. Let's say I was working with a different project sponsor than the one I'm working with. And the other project sponsor had different ideas as to how this was to be implemented. It's not right. It's not wrong. Person A versus person B may have had two different visions. Neither one is wrong. One may be better than the other, but it's up to me to advise that decision and then continue on to completion. So again, we can have any situation can end up with several ways to implement. And it's just up to us to advise as to what we see as the best based on the circumstances at hand.
Very good. Very good. So we're in a unique position at the end of the show today. We don't have any more exam content outline tasks to review.
Wow, we've gone through them all.
Yeah, we've gone through
all 675 of them.
Well, not quite that many, but quite a few. And this was an interesting road, which means that we get to figure out what we're going to be talking about next. What would you like to talk about next week?
Well, why don't we do a best of, seeing we did the exam content outline this week, and if we do a best of, and then we can kind of pick our favorite aspects of that. You and I are not writing the exam, but maybe we can help some people with some ideas as what we see as priority in terms of a project manager's experience.
Yeah, I think that would be valid. And that would be fun. And I think it would be fun for the students as well, as a little bit
Yeah.
of a wrap up for this whole process. And then we can prepare for the week after that and talk about what we're going to be talking about now, the next 6 months. And I think we have some good ideas coming up, but let's see what we come up with for next week. Let's both put a list together and we'll see what we can discuss.
Well, our little discussion on on human behavior and that sort of thing, I think maybe we can go from the, what did you call them, rules and tools, arts and charts. We can go from the technical aspects of a project manager and maybe spend some time on the human aspects, the EQ, emotional intelligence, the, just how it is that we form team and go forward from there. So I think that would be kind of fun.
Yes, it would be. I think. And I've been doing a lot more research on leadership and how people in our societies and in our types of business. I'm not just talking about, United States or IT or anything, but human beings as a group. How do we actually rise to the position of leaders and leadership, and how can we actually advise up and coming project managers to acquire the the rank of quote unquote leader? I think we could spend some time on that too.
No, exactly.
That'll be fun. So where can we find you this next week while you're putting your thoughts together?
I'm still poking around LinkedIn. That's where, that's kind of a favorite place. I've had several queries, I think, since our last two podcasts, of people wanting to connect and discuss a couple of things. So that's always fun.
Good. And myself as well, I've committed to going into LinkedIn and saying hi, and at least starting a semi-regular communication with you all.
Well, and the beauty of having two longtime project managers still working at our craft and still making mistakes means we can bring them to the podcast and say, here's what we can do and here's what we shouldn't do.
That's right. That's very good. Well, thanks again, Merv. It's been a joy, and looking forward to talking to you again next week.